Hard to believe, but it's time for my Halloween build. Well, hey guys, and welcome back to another Insert Modeler, and yeah, it is now time for my Halloween build. For this year, I have chosen this model kit from Xplus Models. It's a 1/35 scale model of the Cyclops from Sinbad. This model came out earlier this year. I got mine around springtime from culttvman.com, and I wanted to get to it right away, but then I was just thinking it would be a great project for our Halloween build this year, and so I had to set it aside all these months. So now that the time is here, I'm really excited to get started with it because I've been looking forward to building this model kit. Out of all of the creatures that Harry Harryhausen designed, this has got to be one of my favorites that he came up with. And so when they made an announcement they were going to make a model of this, I just had to get a hold of it. Now, I wanted to mention here that I'm going to be joined by my friend Marc Fraley. We're going to actually do a buddy build, which is something I haven't done for a while. He's a big fan of this creature as well. And when we both got ours, we actually had the same ideas to make it a Halloween build. So he's going to join us here shortly to tell us what he has planned for his model. But first, let's take a look and see what comes inside this box. Well, here we have the instructions. Pretty simple and straightforward. We've got just two sides to it here. The first side goes over construction of the creature and his club and the cage. Interesting how the cage is only three-sided. It's actually missing a wall. I did see someone who put this model together recently. He added a fourth side to the cage, and I might make that modification. I think that's a good idea. So here's the figure, how to put that together, and of course the skeleton there, and this is how it all comes together with the base. And on the other side they have instructions or suggestions on how to paint the kit. So there are 4 trees or sprues. This first one contains the parts to the base and his club. So on this tree we have the sides to the cage. Again, interesting that they only included 3 sides. We have the top of the cage here, and we've got the skeleton and the figure. And here we have the parts for his legs. Seem to fit together really well. I'm not sure how much we'll need to work with these seams. I think there might have to be a little bit of seam filling there. And this tree has all the parts for the upper torso and head. Really nice detailing that you see here. I really like how they included the eye as a separate piece. You can see that the head has 2 halves. So rather than having to deal with the seam that would run right through the eye there, they've included that as a separate piece, which is great. So as you can see, a great looking model. They did a nice job with adding all the details to the creature. I think I'm going to end up with a really nice replica of the Cyclops. Now, what do I have planned for my build here? I'm going to do pretty much what Lou Del Maso did with his. If you followed his build, it's pretty much a straightforward out-of-the-box build. So I think I'm going to go that route. I am going to make a couple modifications. I would like to build that 4th wall to the cage. As I mentioned when I was flipping through the instructions, I came across a modeler who did just that, and he accomplished it by using skewer sticks. So I'm going to give that a try to see if I can make that look right. And then the other thing is I want to add a little more texture to the base. So I think I'm going to use that Mod Podge with the ground cover mix that I did with the land speeder, and along with that I think I might add some foliage there to bring in some color. Let's take a look actually at some screenshots I took just recently. So as you can see here, the fur on his legs is a reddish brown, so I think I'm going to go for that. As for the skin tones, I haven't fully decided. I might go the same route as Lou, but I'm going to experiment with some colors first before I make my final decision. If you look at the background there, you can see the rocks are kind of a grayish color with the soil being a tan color. But as you can see, they've added in some plants and some foliage there in the background, and I think I'd like to do that just to add some color. So that's what I have planned for mine. Let's check in with Marc to see what he has planned for his build.
Welcome to my project showcase. This is where I'm going to show you how I will build the scale model of the Cyclops from Xplus Models based on the 7th Voyage of Sinbad. This is a classic fantasy movie from 1958 featuring the amazing stop-motion animation of Harry Harryhausen. The Cyclops is one of the most iconic creatures from the movie and a one-eyed giant that terrorizes Sinbad and his crew. I've always been fascinated by this creature and wanted to recreate it in a realistic and detailed way. That is why I decided to use the Xplus model kit, which is a high-quality plastic model kit that comes with a diorama base and a prisoner in a cage. The model kit is very faithful to the original design of the Cyclops and has a lot of details and textures. I also wanted to add some 3D printed models derived from digital models that I created, such as some boulders, rocks, and props. This will help to make the diorama livelier and more interesting. In this video, I will show you how I assembled, painted, and customized the model kit, integrated the 3D printed parts, and how I arranged them on a diorama base. I will also share some tips and tricks on how to make your models look more realistic and professional. I hope you enjoy watching my portion of this buddy build and learn something new from it. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to leave them below. What you are seeing here is the user interface for Blender 3.6 for 3D modeling and printing. This is a screenshot of the scene I will be replicating in my diorama. It is the part of the movie where Sinbad's right-hand man, Harufa, gets a little sidetracked by the discovery of the Cyclops treasure. Cyclops appears and plucks up Harufa, Sinbad, and some of his sailors and tosses them into a cage. Harufa is singled out and tied to a roasting spit intended to be the Cyclops' dinner. This is one of my favorite scenes in the movie and the part of the story that inspired my diorama. I knew I was going to need some terrain to replicate the look of the filming site. I started by creating these boulders that generally match the profile of my reference screenshot. I also created the spit and the stakes that support it. The Harufa figure is not my design but part of another STL file I purchased from Honest Digital Studios for personal use. I was able to merge their figure with my roasting spit to achieve the look I wanted. Next, I was able to 3D print my digital models, turning them into tangible objects. My Elegoo Mars 2P was the machine I used to print everything for this diorama. It was a time-consuming project. So the whole point of this introductory video is to reveal what I have planned for this project. First, I will be expanding the kit diorama by adding digitally created models and props on an 11x14 base. Second, I will be adding additional figures to the scene to represent the characters in the movie. Third, I designed and printed digital models of the missing back part of the cage so that the prisoners cannot escape. And finally, I will add some LEDs beneath the spit to simulate a campfire. I purchased mine from Evan Designs. And that's it. I have a lot of work to do to have this project completed by Halloween. Plus, I have to catch up to Augie, who is a little further ahead on his build. I will record highlights of my build process for the next video. I will see you then.
Wow, Mark, that looks fantastic. I can't wait to see how that all turns out. Over the last couple years, Mark has really perfected his skills at designing things in Blender and converting them into STL files so they can be printed. He's definitely helped me out on a few projects, including most recently the Starfleet Air Tram from Cosmic Scale Models. He designed the track that it sits on as well as the back wall to that diorama. So definitely look forward to that. All right, let's go ahead and get started here with my build. Well, looking back at the instructions, again, we have three phases to this build. We have the creature and the club that goes along with him there. We've got the cage and the figures that go inside, and we have the display base. In this video, I'm going to concentrate on the creature and trying to decide between the torso and the legs. I think I'm going to go ahead and get started on the legs because I have a few seams there to address. All right, moving on to the legs now. And when it comes to assembling, just follow the instructions. You'll know what I mean. You have to go in a certain sequence as you assemble these. But we're going to get right to the seams now. And these particular seams here, I want to use Apoxie Sculpt putty with because the texture of the hair continues on through here, but then it flattens out here because of the way the model joins together and continues on here. So rather than just putting putty here, I want to go ahead and try to use Apoxie Sculpt to create similar texture so it blends together and there's not just this flattening that goes on here. So I'm going to apply that same technique all around here to these heavier seams and throughout this area too. Now there are a couple seams here on the hooves here and here that we need to take care of. These don't look too bad to have to deal with, as well as these along the legs here. There is a seam along here, but it's pretty well hidden. So anything that is there, I think I'm going to use just regular putty, but I may just use Apoxie Sculpt for some of this as well. Now, as you do this, you don't want to mix a lot of Apoxie Sculpt together because it hardens after a certain amount of time. And you know, as you're doing this, you're going to waste a lot of it if you mix too much. Water is a good thing to use, as I've shown in the past with Apoxie Sculpt, to soften it up. Even if it does start to harden, you can bring it back a little bit there by just applying some water, and just using the blunt edges now of my sculpting tools here to create the same texture as the areas that surround the putty. Well, this took a little bit longer than I thought it would, but wasn't that hard to do. Just takes a bit of time. So I'm going to give this some time to dry before priming it. As you can see, I ended up using the Apoxie Sculpt for some of these heavier seams on the hooves as well. I'll of course sand those smooth once everything is dry. Well, I'm very pleased with how the legs turned out here. The goal here was to replicate the look of the hair and texture around the seams. I think the Apoxie Sculpt was a good choice for that. If by chance you don't want to use Apoxie Sculpt for whatever reason, but yet you want to try something like this, you might want to try this as an alternative. It's called Perfect Plastic Putty. This particular product has a larger applicator here and allows you to squeeze out a pretty generous amount when you use it. So that's what I did. I would just squeeze out a glob of it here, and as it came out, I would just kind of maneuver it around and shape it. Now, this is something that I use for larger seams. I used to use the Tamiya product a lot, which is a good product, but what I like about this one is that it has very little to no odor, and it dries quickly and is easy to sand as well. Alright, let's get now to the upper torso and the head. I want to make a couple points here about the head in particular. Now, the instructions tell you to insert the eye and the mouth as well as the horn prior to putting the two halves together. And I recall watching Lou Del Maso build his and how he was able to slide in the mouth after assembling these two halves. And the way to do that actually is to just snip off these tabs here. I think that's a better approach because you have some seam filling to do here and of course some painting, and if you spent the time to detail the mouth, you're going to have to mask all that off, and to avoid all that, I think it's best to do it this way. So I'm going to follow his approach with that. And when assembling the torso now, you do have to have this inserted into place prior to putting these two halves together because it's a pretty tight fit, as it should be. And if you try to slide in this part while this has been glued together, you're going to just crack this open or damage any work that you've done here to hide these seams. Alright, so let me go ahead and get a few things done here, and I'll get you caught up here in a second. Alright, so here we have the upper torso now that's been assembled and the seams have been filled in. Let me walk you through a couple things here. I ended up using 3 kinds of putty for this. For the most part, I ended up using the Perfect Plastic Putty for his shoulders and for the seams along the sides here. I also use this for the seams along these fingers that you have to attach. There was a little bit of a gap here, a larger gap on this side, so I ended up using a little Bondo for that. And I ended up using a little Bondo on the arms as well. There was a little bit of a gap right there that needed a little bit heavier putty. So the skin to this model is fairly irregular and contoured, so it is fairly forgiving. Meaning that you know, there can be some irregularity left over if you applied the putty. It doesn't have to be completely smoothed over 100%. It actually will blend right into the rest of it. Now, I did mention that I used 3 types of putty. This is the third one here. You've seen me use this on the channel before. This is plastic putty from Vallejo. This has a finer applicator and is great for filling in tinier gaps, something that doesn't need heavier putty. Let me just show you a good example is here on the side of the arm. When we put this piece into place here, you know, it's a good fit, but you can see there is a gap here. So there are some other places that are like that. There is a gap along the base of the neck. We've got gaps along the ears. In fact, you can still see the putty sitting here drying along the ears. They were the last pieces that I attached. And here's some video of me applying the putty onto this area. And as usual, just using a wet Q-tip to wipe away the excess. The other areas include along here where the nose and eye is inserted. There's a little bit of a gap there, and there's a gap also along the base of the horn. Okay, well, now that this is all set, the arms have to be glued on, of course, and that gap to be filled, as I mentioned. Once that is done, I think I'll be ready to start applying our base color. And I will work on the mouth as I get started with that. Well, the base color has been applied now, and I'm very pleased with how this turned out. This color was arrived at by using this milk chocolate from Craftsmart, and also mixed in some skin tone and flat flesh, both from Vallejo. It's about a 70% mix of this, and the rest being made up of this stuff here. And as you can tell, I've of course decided to go with the brown tones as we saw in the movie. So the fur is going to be of more reddish brown, and I'm also going to be applying some shadows and highlights to add more variation to the upper torso. I did finish the mouth now, at least I've assembled it. This is what it looked like prior to assembly. Just comes in 3 pieces. I painted the interior of the mouth with vermilion mixed with a little white and red, and I painted the color of the teeth with a mix of white and that milk chocolate because you don't want them gleaming white. Now off to the sides are 2 seams that I need to fill in, so I just used plastic putty for that. I'm going to sand this in just a minute here and paint that over with the base color. Once the mouth has been put into place, we'll move on with the shadows and the highlights. Okay, jumping ahead now, I have the shadows applied here to the crevices and just different areas that I felt the shadows would be appropriate for. And the color that I used here was a mix of these 2, milk chocolate and espresso, both from Craftsmart. And so you can see I'm using my airbrush here to do that, and I think it turned out well. Well, I'm going to go ahead and jump ahead here and show you the figure after a wash has been applied. I felt it was necessary to do so to bring out a lot of this detailing here. It looked a little flat to me without doing this. This is a video of me applying the wash now, and this is just a dark brown wash. Now you can see that once this is dry, the figure was very, very dark. You don't want to leave it this way, obviously. So prior to applying this wash, a gloss coat was sprayed on, and that protected the paint underneath. And this allowed me to wipe off a lot of the excess with a wet cloth. And I continued to work at it so that I could get it back to the lightness that I wanted. So to bring back some of the shadows, what I ended up doing was adding in some of this roasted pecan. And for the highlights, I used some raw sienna and some yellow added into our base color. You can see this is me now applying some of that mixture. And I kept working at it until I got to the level that you see here. I did color in the horn as well as the nails, and for that I used a mixture of white and khaki, both from Vallejo. Well, after that step was completed, I moved on to painting the eye, and I had every intention on showing you how I did that. Unfortunately, I forgot to press record. I am so sorry. I really meant to have that footage for you, but let me show you what the eye looks like. It really came out well. This is a good size eye on this model, so it would have been a good one to really demonstrate on. It allowed me to paint a bit more detail than I typically do with some of the smaller sculpts I've worked with. So what I hope to do in the future is to do a tutorial on just painting an eye. I know I've done one before with the smaller bust, but I've been asked about this subject a number of times, so I think it'd be good to do a video on that. So for now, we're going to move on to the legs here. So what I have is some footage to show you here just to talk you through this now. Took the legs and painted them with a light brown color. This was just simply a mix of some raw sienna and a sand color. Once that was dried, I applied the dark brown wash that I used on the torso, and of course this darkened everything up. And I allowed this time to dry and then applied highlights using a mix of the milk chocolate and the roasted pecan. And I just dried brushed this on, and this is how they turned out. So once this was done, I decided to blend it a little further because it was too much contrast, so I just took a mix of the milk chocolate and that pecan color and lightly misted it over the legs. And then I painted the hooves with a black-brown color. So the next step here was to join the torso and the legs together, and so I used Apoxie Sculpt putty again for this. And this has certainly been helpful with this model to conceal these seams because the hair is textured a certain way. And so rather than just trying to fill in the seam with just putty, I went ahead and used the same technique, and it worked well. Once this was dried, I painted it a black-brown color and applied the same highlights as the rest of it. And this is how he turned out. I'm really pleased with the final results here. I have to say, Xplus Models did a fantastic job capturing the likeness of this creature. And I will definitely give you a closer look at him, but you'll have to wait for the final reveal. In the meantime, I'm going to go ahead and set him aside. Now, in that last segment that I was narrating, you might have heard some humming going on in the background, and that was my 3D printer. I was actually printing the sides of the cage. If you remember, I intended on enclosing the cage as well, but was planning on using skewers to do so. Now I don't need to do that because Marc was kind enough to send the STL files for that. So thank you, Marc, for doing that. Now that they're done, I can clean them up and get started. So coming up then in part 2 will be the completion of that cage along with the figures that go inside them. I do have to complete the club for the creature and the display base, which I've already started on. I know we're all excited to see Marc's build for sure, so I can't wait for that. We plan on having the video up on the channel shortly before Halloween or on Halloween. Marc is very confident that he can get everything done. I know he's working hard at it for sure. So if you have any questions for either one of us, feel free to leave a comment here on the channel or email me at interstellarmodeler@gmail.com. Hope you enjoyed following this build so far, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one. Take care.